I stopped by the flower shop owned by my best friend of more than 50 years to buy roses for my wife's birthday. The moment I stepped inside, he grabbed my arm. The retired private investigator's face had gone completely pale. "Quick," he whispered, dragging me toward a storage room. "Hide in here and don't make a sound." Before I could ask a single question, he locked the door behind me. 5 minutes later, I heard the shop bell ring. Then I heard my wife's voice, and my son-in-law's. What they said next made my stomach drop. "Welcome back to Revenge, Dad. Before we continue, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me. Have you ever discovered someone close to you was betraying you? Your story matters here. Just a quick note, some details are fictionalized for storytelling and reflection, but the message at the heart of this is what truly counts." Floyd's hand closed around my shoulder before I could say hello. His face drained of color in a way I'd never seen in 53 years of friendship. I'd come to Ashford Flowers for the same reason I'd come every December 13th for the past 40 years, red roses for my wife's birthday party. At 68, after building Mercer Climate Solutions from a single truck into a regional HVAC empire and retiring 5 years ago, I thought I'd finally earned the kind of peace that comes with ordinary Friday afternoons and predictable traditions. The shop doorbell had chimed its familiar two-note greeting, Floyd Ashford. 69 white hair, still thick as it had been when we were 16, shoulders still square from 2 decades as a private investigator before he'd traded surveillance for flower arrangements, looked up from trimming stems at the counter. Then his face went the color of old snow. The scissors clattered against the tile. He crossed the shop in 4 strides faster than a man his age had any right to move, and his fingers dug into my jacket with the kind of grip that leaves bruises. "Floyd, what? No matter what you hear," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear, "don't come out. Trust me. Please." Before I could answer, before I could ask what the hell was happening in a flower shop on a Friday afternoon, he was pulling me past the display buckets of carnations and lilies around the counter through the door marked "Employees Only." The back room smelled like cardboard and damp soil and decades of accumulated dust. Floyd shoved me between stacked boxes of ribbon and a shelf of ceramic vases into a space barely wide enough for my shoulders. "Don't make a sound," he said through the door, crack his voice barely audible. "I mean it." The lock clicked. I crouched there in the darkness, my knees protesting my heart, hammering against my ribs like it was trying to break through bone. Through the thin wood, I could hear Floyd's breathing, fast, shallow, the kind of breathing that comes before panic or violence. At 68, I'd seen Floyd calm through his divorce, through his daughter's accident, through the death of his first business partner. I'd never seen him look terrified. What could make a man who'd faced down armed suspects in 22 years as a private investigator look this scared in his own flower shop? The doorbell chimed again. Footsteps crossed the shop floor. 2 sets. One light familiar, the click of heels I'd heard on the kitchen tile for 4 decades. The other, heavier, deliberate, expensive shoes on cheap flooring. But my wife's voice, warm, bright, the voice that had read bedtime stories to our daughter, and good morning greetings to me for longer than some people stay alive. "The roses are lovely this year. Mrs. Mercer." Floyd's response came out too smooth, too practiced the voice he used to use on suspects he was tailing. "Always a pleasure. Shopping for the party tonight." "Just browsing." Estelle's heels clicked closer to my hiding spot. Through the crack in the door, I could see her silhouette, 65 silver hair. She'd stopped dyeing 3 years ago, the cardigan she always wore on Fridays. 30 years teaching 2nd grade had given her a voice that carried without shouting. "These red roses are beautiful, a little tacky and outdated, exactly what he likes." Something cold slid down my spine. He's always appreciated classic arrangements. Floyd's voice stayed level, but I knew him well enough to hear the edge underneath. "Classic." Estelle laughed soft and low. "That's one word for it." The second set of footsteps moved closer, a man's voice smooth as polished steel. "Floyd, we need to talk about tonight's delivery timeline. Brent, my son-in-law, 40 years old, Harvard Business School, smile CEO, of the company I'd built with my own hands and stupidly handed over 5 years ago, thinking family meant safety. Timeline's all set, Mr. Townsend." Floyd's voice had gone flat emotionless, the tone I remembered from his PI days when he was lying to Marks. "Everything's ready." "Good." Brent's shoes stopped inches from the storage room door. "What about tonight?" Estelle asked, her voice dropping lower. Once he signs, everything will belong to us. The paperwork's clean. Simple transfer of assets for estate planning purposes. He won't even read it before he signs. He never does, Estelle said. The floor tilted. My hand found the wall pressing against rough concrete to keep from falling. Finally, Estelle added, and there was something in that word, relief, satisfaction, the sound of someone reaching the end of a very long wait. My wife, the woman who'd stood beside me in a courthouse in 1982, wearing a borrowed dress and holding discount flowers. The woman who'd gripped my hand in the delivery room when our daughter was born. The woman I'd bought red roses for every December 13th, because that was the day she'd told me yes. Tacky, make sure he's in a good mood tonight. Brent said, his voice already fading toward the door. Everything depends on the signature. We're running out of time. He's always in a good mood on my birthday. Estelle's heels clicked away. It's pathetic, really. Predictable. The doorbell chimed. Silence flooded the shop like water filling a drowning man's lungs. I sat in the darkness, my back against boxes of wire and foam, the scent of roses drifting through the crack in the door. The same roses I'd bought every year, the same flowers I'd thought meant something. 40 years of December 13ths. 40 years of thinking tacky and outdated meant beloved and familiar. Tacky, that single word. 40 years. The lock clicked, light spilled into the storage room too bright after the darkness, and Floyd stood in the doorway. Not panicked anymore, just tired. The kind of tired that settles into bone after carrying weight you can't put down. I've known for 7 months, he said quietly, his voice steady. Now the voice of someone who's rehearsed this moment in his head 100 times. And I've gathered enough evidence to ruin both of them. The navy blue notebook was 2 inches thick, spiral bound, and when Floyd placed it on the small kitchen table between us, it landed with the weight of something that had been waiting a long time to be opened. He'd led me from the storage room to the back kitchen, a cramped space with a coffee maker and a table barely big enough for 2. His hands shook as he measured grounds filled the pot. The door opened. A woman with silver hair pulled back in a bun, stepped through, took one look at our faces, and stopped. "I'll mind the front," Dorothy Ashford said, quietly. 67, married to Floyd for 40 years. She'd learned long ago when not to ask questions. The door closed. Floyd set a mug in front of me, coffee I wouldn't drink. He sat down, both hands on the notebook. "You need to see all of it before you decide what to do." He opened to the first page. The handwriting was Floyd's neat block letters from his PI days. A first entry, May 14th, 2:47 p.m. Your son-in-law walked into my shop alone. The page showed a date-time license plate number. Below that, subject entered purchased single white rose, asked about backroom privacy for business meetings. Offered $50 cash per use. I declined. He returned 1 week later. I turned the page. May 21st, same time. Brent brought Estelle. Floyd had printed a security camera, still grainy black and white, unmistakable. My wife and my son-in-law at the back table, heads bent together over papers. "I have 18 meetings documented," Floyd said. 11 with both of them present. Every visit at 2:47 p.m. That's when Vivica's teaching shift starts. My voice came out flat. "He knows she's at the school until 4. "Yes." Floyd flipped through pages. More photos. June 3rd, June 17th, July 8th. "See how she signs here, June 3rd? Not forced. Willing." The photo showed Estelle's hand holding a pen, her signature flowing across a document. Her face wasn't visible, but I knew the angle of her shoulders, the way she tilted her head when concentrating. "They chose your shop because they thought I was just an old man who sells flowers and asks no questions." Floyd's mouth twisted. "They were half right. I do sell flowers, but I spent 22 years asking questions for money, and some instincts don't retire." I turned more pages. The notebook was meticulous. License plates cross-referenced with DMV records. Timestamps verified by credit card receipts from the coffee shop next door, where Brent always bought 2 lattes first. Photographs from 3 angles Floyd had set up cameras. Not just watched, documented. How do you reconcile 40 years of marriage with 18 documented meetings where your wife signs papers to steal your life? "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out quiet. "In May, in June. Why wait 7 months?" Floyd was silent. Outside I could hear Dorothy talking to a customer, her voice cheerful and practiced. Normal Friday afternoon in a flower shop. "Because I needed proof," Floyd said finally. Not suspicion, not a hunch. Proof you couldn't explain away. Would you have believed me in May? Without this, he tapped the notebook. Or, would you have asked her about it? The answer sat in my chest like a stone. I would have asked her, I said, and she would have explained it away. Yes. Floyd's voice was gentle. She would have said Brent was helping with estate planning or updating paperwork. You would have believed her because you've trusted her for 40 years. And then they would have known I was watching. He flipped to a page near the back. August 23rd. A printed email subject line, Asset Transfer Timeline. A former Mercer Climate employee had forwarded the email chain to Floyd anonymously 3 months earlier, afraid of what they'd seen, but unwilling to go to the police alone. I didn't ask the employee's name. I hoped I was wrong, Floyd said quietly. For the first 3 months, I hoped every day that there was some explanation I wasn't seeing, that I was paranoid, that my training was making me suspicious of innocent meetings. But you weren't wrong. No, I wasn't wrong. I closed the notebook, stood. My knees felt unsteady. The kitchen was too small, too warm, the smell of coffee suddenly nauseating. I walked to the shop floor. Dorothy was behind the counter arranging carnations in a glass vase. She looked up, but didn't speak. The shop was empty late afternoon lull. The roses were still there, red, yellow, white, arranged in buckets by the window. Sunlight caught the petals. I looked at them for a long time. Then I chose 12 red roses, long stems, perfect blooms. The same ones I'd bought every December 13th since 1984. Floyd had followed me out. You're still going to the party after everything you just saw? I'm going because of everything I just saw. I handed the roses to Dorothy. And I'm buying these because that's what I came here to do. Dorothy wrapped them in brown paper, tied the bundle with twine, rang up the sale without meeting my eyes. $12 even, she said. $12, 40 years, same roses every birthday. I laid the money on the counter. Floyd walked me to the door, his hand on my shoulder again. Not panicked this time, just steady. Old friend to old friend. What are you going to do? He asked. I don't know yet, I said, but I'll figure it out before I sign anything. I placed the roses on the passenger seat and started the engine. Through the windshield 3 miles ahead, I could see my house, the one I'd worked 30 years to own, lit up like a celebration. Party guests would be arriving in 90 minutes. Estelle would be setting the table. And Brent would be waiting for me to sign papers that would make him owner of everything I'd built. The traffic light ahead turned red. I stopped roses on the passenger seat house lights visible 3 miles ahead. 90 minutes until the party. 90 minutes to figure out what I was going to do. When did I first know something was wrong with Brent Townsend? Really know in the way your body knows, before your brain admits it. The memory came back sharp and clear, autumn evening 10 years ago. October, maybe November. The dining room table I'd built from oak in 1993, the one Vivica had done her homework on for 15 years. Candles burning. Estelle's roast chicken with rosemary, the recipe she'd perfected over 30 years of Friday dinners. Vivica had brought him home for the first time. She was 31 then, teaching 3rd grade at the same school, where Estelle taught 2nd, nervous in the way people get when they're introducing someone they think might be important. Brent was 32, Harvard Business School, on his resume consulting firm downtown. Handsome in that catalog way, where every feature is technically correct, but nothing stands out enough to remember. We ate chicken, made small talk. He complimented the house, asked about the neighborhood, said the right things about Vivica's teaching career. Everything normal. Then he turned to me. Distribution in HVAC must be challenging. He said, cutting his chicken with precise movements. Seasonal demand inventory forecasting. How do you manage cash flow in shoulder months? I remember stopping mid-bite, not because the question was rude, because it was specific, technical, the kind of question you ask when you understand the industry, not when you're making polite conversation with your girlfriend's father. We carry higher inventory in spring and fall, I said, slowly watching his face. Pre-position units before peak seasons. Summer and winter are when we collect. Smart. He nodded, genuine interest in his eyes. And supplier contracts, do you lock in pricing annually or negotiate quarterly? Depends on the manufacturer. Of course, he smiled. Carrier versus train, different relationship dynamics. He knew the manufacturers, knew enough to know they had different contract structures. Vivica was glowing. Estelle was refilling water glasses. Everything looked normal, but my stomach had gone tight. Later, washing dishes at the sink, Estelle came up beside me. "You like him, don't you?" she asked. "He's intelligent," I said. And I scrubbed a plate watching Brent and Vivica through the kitchen window. They were on the back porch, her head on his shoulder, both of them laughing at something I couldn't hear. "So smart," I said quietly. "Too smart." Estelle had touched my arm. "That's a good thing, honey. Vivica needs someone who can keep up with her." But that wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me was simpler. No one asks those questions on a first meeting. No one knows to ask about carrier versus train unless they have researched beforehand, unless they've done homework. Why would Vivica's new boyfriend research my business? I'd looked at them through the window, my daughter happy, laughing safe in someone's arms, and I'd made a choice. I chose to believe I was being paranoid. I chose to believe he was just making conversation, being interested, trying to impress. Why do we ignore the warnings our bodies give us when our children bring someone home they love? I chose love over instinct. It seemed kind at the time. 3 years later, they married. Small ceremony courthouse wedding, because Vivica wanted simple, and Brent said he didn't care about pageantry. I walked her down a municipal hallway in a building that smelled like floor wax and paid parking. She wore a blue dress. He wore a suit that cost more than my first car. 2 years after that, 4 years after that first dinner, I sat in my office on the 4th floor of Mercer Climate Solutions and signed the papers that made him CEO. I was 63. I'd built the company from a single truck in 1984. 35 years of 6 a.m. service calls and midnight emergency repairs and learning to read installation manuals in 3 languages because that's what it took to stay competitive. The desk I was packing had been mine since we moved into this building in 2003. Photos on the wall, first employee hire, 100th install, 1,000th customer. Brent stood by the window, hands in his pockets, 35 years old, and wearing confidence like a well-tailored jacket. Attorney Keith Stratton sat across from me with the transfer documents spread out on the desk. Keith had handled our corporate filings for 18 years and knew better than to ask why a 63-year-old man was handing his company to his son-in-law. His job was paperwork, not questions. "I sign here, and initial here," Keith said, tapping each page with his pen. "Mr. Townsend assumes full executive authority effective immediately." I signed. The pen was the same one I'd used to sign the original incorporation papers in 1984. Black ink, steady hand. "Take care of it," I said to Brent when the last signature was done. "I built this for family." He crossed the office, held out his hand. Firm handshake, eye contact, everything correct. "I understand exactly what you built, Harlan," he said. "I won't forget." I carried the cardboard box to the elevator. Photos awards calculator I'd bought the year Vivica was born. Pressed the button. Waited. Before the doors closed, I looked back through the glass wall of the executive suite. Brent had already taken my chair. He sat facing the window silhouette against afternoon light, hands folded on the desk like he'd been sitting there his entire life. Our eyes met through the glass. He raised his hand, slight wave, professional, respectful. I nodded. The elevator doors closed. The elevator descended. 35 years compressed into 60 seconds of mechanical hum. I gave him the keys to everything I'd built with a smile, with love, with trust, because he was family. Because I thought family meant safety. 5 years later, sitting in my car at a red light with roses on the passenger seat, I understand he wanted those keys before he ever met my daughter. The questions at that first dinner weren't curiosity. They were confirmation. He'd already decided I was worth targeting. Dinner was just verifying I was the kind of man who'd hand over everything for family. And I was. The flashback dissolved. My hands were on the steering wheel. The traffic light was green. I didn't know how long it had been green. That first dinner, that handover. Every choice I made with love made me easier to rob. And in 90 minutes at Estelle's birthday party, Brent would ask me to sign one more paper, thinking I still didn't see the pattern. But I saw the pattern 3 years ago and chose to look away. The numbers didn't lie, but I chose to ignore them anyway because the man stealing from me was married to my daughter. It was autumn 2021. I was 65, officially retired from Mercer Climate for 2 years. Brown leather reading chair and my home office desk lamp, throwing warm light across quarterly financial reports I still received out of habit. Old routines die hard. The third quarter summary sat open on my lap. Revenue looked solid. Operating expenses, normal. Then one line item caught my eye and wouldn't let go. Strategic consulting expenses up 340% year over year. Cold coffee sat beside me in the mug Vivica had given me for Father's Day back when she was 12. The coffee had been hot an hour ago when I'd started reading. Now it was cold because I'd been staring at that one number for 60 minutes. 340%. Supply chain consulting doesn't jump like that. Not in a mature business. Not unless something is fundamentally wrong or someone is billing expenses that don't exist. I'd built that company on understanding what numbers should look like. 35 years of reading balance sheets, spotting discrepancies, knowing when contractors were padding invoices or managers were hiding problems. My hands knew fraud the way a mechanic's hands know engine trouble. But this was Brent. Family. He ran the company now. Surely he knew what he was doing. I picked up my phone, dialed his office. He answered on the second ring. Harlan? His voice was smooth, confident, exactly the way a CEO should sound. Good to hear from you. How's retirement treating you? Fine. Good. I looked at the report again. I'm reading Q3 financials. Consulting line jumped significantly. Just wanted to understand it. Ah, yes. No hesitation, no defensiveness. We're restructuring the entire supply chain. External consultants are expensive, but necessary for the complexity we're dealing with. It'll pay off in year 2 when we see efficiency gains. The answer was perfect. Exactly what you'd say if you were legitimately investing in growth. Exactly what you'd say if you were lying. What firm are you using? I asked. Couple of them. Northeast Asset Partners handles logistics modeling. We brought in a smaller boutique for vendor negotiations. I can send you the contracts if you want a review. No, I set the report down. Just wanted to understand the jump. Always good to ask questions, Harlan. Warmth in his voice, respect. That's why you built something worth protecting. We said goodbye. I hung up. I looked at the report one more time. 340%. My gut said wrong. My experience said wrong. Every instinct I'd trusted for 35 years said wrong. But my son-in-law had given me a reasonable answer. Why do we become amateurs in our own lives when the people we love are involved? I put the report in my desk drawer, turned the small brass key in the lock. The click sounded final, absolute, like a door closing on a question I didn't want to answer. That report stayed locked in that drawer for 3 years. I'd put it there to keep it safe. What I was really doing was keeping myself safe from what it meant. I wasn't locking away paper. I was locking away the truth. 1 year later, Christmas 2022, the dining room table I'd built from oak 30 years earlier, the one where Brent had asked his 2 specific questions, the one where Vivica had done homework and eaten birthday cake and become the woman I was proudest of in the entire world. The table was full: turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, rolls from the bakery Estelle had been using since Vivica was born, candles burning. Everything looked right. Everything felt hollow. Vivica sat across from me, 35 years old, teaching art to 3rd graders at the same school where Estelle taught reading. She ate, said please and thank you, didn't meet my eyes. Ren, 3 years old, chattering about her toys and the Christmas play where she got to be a reindeer. Her voice was the only real sound in the room. Everyone else was performing. I tried. How's your class this year, Vivica? I passed the potatoes. Still teaching 3rd grade art? Fine. She took the bowl without looking up. They're fine. Brent made appropriate conversation about the weather, the food plans for New Year's. Estelle served and smiled and played hostess like nothing was wrong. Maybe to her nothing was. Dessert came, pie. Ren bounced in her chair. Come give Grandpa a hug before dessert, I said, offering my arms. Vivica intercepted hand on Ren's shoulder. She's eating Dad. 3 years old, and my granddaughter looked at me like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to hug me. I lowered my arms. We ate pie in silence, broken only by Ren's questions that no one really answered. After dinner, Ren broke free while they were getting coats, ran to me, threw arms around my waist. Her hair smelled like cinnamon and child shampoo. She felt small and perfect, and I held on longer than I probably should have. I love you, Grandpa, she whispered. Love you too, little one. Vivica pulled her away. Not rough, not mean, just firm. Time to go home. Thanks for dinner, Vivica said at the door. No hug, no warmth, eyes still not meeting mine. 37 years, one glance, gone. I watched their car back out of the driveway, taillights disappearing down the street into December darkness. First time since she was born, since I held her in the hospital and promised to always protect her, that my daughter left my house without love in her eyes. Estelle closed the door behind me. She's having her own problems. she said, already walking back to the kitchen. Don't pressure her. Yes, I said to the closed door. I didn't ask what problems. I didn't ask why my daughter couldn't look at me anymore. I didn't ask why my granddaughter needed permission to hug me. I just accepted it, like I'd accepted the consulting expenses, like I'd accepted every warning sign, because examining them meant breaking something I wasn't ready to break. The memories dissolve. I'm pulling into my driveway now, 5:30 in the evening, Rose is still on the passenger seat. Through the front window, I can see Estelle setting the table, the same table where 2 years ago my daughter wouldn't look at me. In 90 minutes, that daughter will be here at the party where Brent expects me to sign away everything. What he doesn't know is that Vivica already knows the truth. How Vivica knows, I'll find out soon enough. First, I have to walk through that front door. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, engine off, watching my own house prepare to betray me. 5:30 in the evening. December, darkness coming, early. Streetlights already glowing orange against blue twilight. My house sat 40 feet ahead. 3-bedroom suburban colonial white siding. I'd repainted myself in 2008. Black shutters Estelle picked out because they looked classic. I bought it in 1994 for $160,000. Paid it off over 30 years. Every spare dollar, every overtime shift. Every vacation we didn't take because the mortgage came first. Through the dining room window, I could see Estelle setting the table, moving between kitchen and dining room, with plates, glasses, the good silverware we only use for birthdays and holidays. She looked normal, happy even, planning a party for herself, while planning to help her lover steal everything I owned. The roses sat on the passenger seat beside me, brown paper wrapping already wilting at the edges. 30 years, 60-hour weeks when I was building the business, 100-hour weeks when competition got tough. Every mortgage payment on time, never late, never missed. For what? So my son-in-law could steal it in one signature. I could see the table through the window, the same oak table where we'd celebrated Vivica's first day of kindergarten, with cupcakes and candles. Her high school graduation with sparkling cider because she was only 18. Her wedding to Brent with champagne and toasts about family and future. Family. A car pulled into the driveway. New BMW black gleaming under the porch light like it had been detailed that afternoon. I'd never seen it before. The driver's door opened and Brent stepped out in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first month's salary at the HVAC company where I'd started as an installer. He carried a briefcase, leather expensive, the kind lawyers use. He walked up the front steps like he owned the place. Maybe he thought he already did. I sat in the dark car doing math in my head. That's a $60,000 vehicle. The CEO salary I'd approved before I retired was $90,000, unless he'd given himself a raise. Unless he was using company funds for personal expenses. Of course he was. That's what this had always been about. The BMW sat in my driveway like evidence I'd been too stupid to see for 8 years. Every expensive suit. Every luxury Vivica mentioned in passing. Every time Brent picked up the check at dinner with casual generosity that I'd thought was success but was actually theft. How do you walk into your own home, knowing the table, you bought the walls, you painted the mortgage you sacrificed for, are about to be signed away to the man sitting at that table? The front door opened. Ren came running down the steps in a red sweater and Jean's dark hair bouncing. 7-year-old gap, where her front tooth was growing back in face that looked exactly like Vivica's at that age. She saw my car and her whole face lit up pure joy, uncomplicated the way children love before they learn reasons not to. She ran to the driver's window and yanked the door open before I could react. Grandpa. She threw her arms around my neck, squeezing tight. She smelled like apples and children's shampoo and something sweet I couldn't identify. You're here. Why are you sitting in the car? Just thinking, sweetheart. About what? Grown-up things. Nothing important. She pulled back, studying my face with the seriousness children use when they know something's wrong, but don't have words for it yet. Come on. She grabbed my arm, tugging. Grandma made your favorite cake, and there's so many people inside already. I let her pull me out of the car, grabbed the roses from the passenger seat. The paper crinkled in my hand. What are those? Ren asked. Roses, for your grandma's birthday. They're pretty. She'll like them. No, I thought, she won't. She already told me they're tacky. Ren pulled me toward the house, her hand small and warm in mine. She was talking, words spilling out in that 7-year-old way, where everything is urgent and important and connected by logic only children understand. And Mom's inside. She got here like an hour ago. And Grandma's making so much food. And Dad brought his friend Lyle. I stopped walking. Ren tugged harder. Come on, Grandpa! And Lyle's already here. Yeah, he came with Dad. He's really nice. He asked me about school and everything. It's not even 6 o'clock, I said quietly. Ren didn't hear the weight in my voice. I know he and Dad have been in the dining room with papers and stuff for like forever. Mom told me not to bother them. But you're here now, so we can start the party. Papers and stuff. Brent's lawyer brought papers to my house an hour before the party started. Sat in my dining room, the one I paid for preparing documents to take everything I owned. Not pretending it was casual, not hiding it. They were that confident, that certain I'd just sign whatever they put in front of me, because I was predictable old Harlan who trusted family and never asked hard questions. An hour early, papers ready. They thought I'd just sign. Ren pulled harder. Grandpa, come on, everyone's waiting. I looked down at her. 7 years old, and she had no idea what was happening in her grandparents' house tonight. No idea her father was a thief. No idea her grandmother was a conspirator. No idea that in 90 minutes, everything she thought was normal was going to shatter. I squeezed her hand. Okay, sweetheart, let's go inside. She beamed and pulled me up the front steps. The porch light cast our shadows long across the lawn. The door was open, warm light spilling out into December cold. I could hear voices inside Estelle's laugh, someone else talking music, playing softly. Ren pulled me through the door. It closed behind us with a soft click, the sound of a trap completing. I stood in my own entryway holding 12 red roses in one hand and my granddaughter's hand in the other. The house smelled like roast and cake and coffee. Everything normal, everything a lie. And somewhere in this house, probably still in my dining room, probably still reviewing their papers, Brent and his lawyer were waiting with documents that would never be signed. They would be waiting, but they could wait a few more minutes. First, I needed to remember what Floyd had told me the parts that made walking through that door possible, instead of insane. But to understand why I walked into my own house knowing what would happen, you need to know what Floyd told me before I left his shop, the part about how much Brent owed and to whom. The memory came back clear. Floyd's kitchen 4 hours earlier, coffee going cold on the table between us. He'd closed the Navy notebook and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Printout looks like it came from somewhere official, but Floyd never said where, and I never asked. Numbers written in Floyd's block handwriting in the margin $280,000. This is what he owes, Floyd said, tapping the number. $280,000 to an interstate gambling operation. I'd stared at the paper. Gambling Brent doesn't... I stopped. Because what was I going to say? That I'd never seen him gamble, I'd never seen him ask those questions at first dinner either, but he had. I'd never seen him embezzle from my company, but the numbers said he did. I've never seen him gamble. I finished quietly. That's the point. Floyd folded the paper precise creases. This isn't poker night with friends. This is underground football betting college and pro. The kind you hide from everyone. The kind that starts small and gets out of control before you realize you're in too deep. $280,000. That's not casual betting. That's addiction. That's desperation. How do you know it's him? I asked. Floyd pulled out his phone, showed me a photo. Bank transfer receipt. Brent's name at the top, payment to something called Northeast Consulting Group. Except Floyd had traced the LLC registration, and Northeast Consulting Group was a shell company for an operation running book across 5 states. I have 12 different transfers, Floyd said. All to shells that trace back to the same network. He's been betting for 3 years, started small, got in deep, tried to get out, couldn't. And now he's in debt to criminals. Not just criminals. This network has a reputation. Floyd's voice went flat, the tone he used to use on surveillance reports when he was stating facts without emotion. I found 2 previous cases through old contacts. Hartford 2019, Newark 2021, both debtors hospitalized when they couldn't pay on time. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. Define hospitalized. One was in ICU for 8 days. Broken ribs, punctured lung, facial fractures. The other lost 3 fingers. I looked at the number again. 280,000. And Brent's deadline. 10 days from now, maybe less. Floyd met my eyes. Your house is worth enough to clear his debt completely. That's why tonight matters. That's why he can't wait. He's not just greedy, he's desperate. And desperate men with violent creditors don't have the luxury of patience. When does a family problem become a criminal problem? When the person robbing you owes money to people who solve problems with violence. I'd sat there processing that information. My son-in-law wasn't just a thief. He was a debtor to violent criminals who were using my assets as collateral in a world I didn't understand. My house wasn't just something Brent wanted, it was something he needed to avoid being hospitalized. Or worse. There's more, Floyd said. Of course there was. He pulled out a tablet, opened a folder. Security camera stills from his shop. I recognized the back table where I'd heard them talking. Different dates in the corner of each photo. May 14th, 2023. June 3rd, 2023. August 17th, 2023. 11 photos total, all showing the same thing: Brent and Estelle sitting at that table, papers spread between them, heads together, like co-conspirators planning something important. Because that's exactly what they were. Floyd zoomed in on one photo. June 3rd. Estelle held a pen reading a document. Her face showed concentration, not confusion. Not fear, not someone being manipulated. Someone reading carefully before signing something she understood. "And see how she signs here," Floyd pointed. Not hesitant, not forced. She's reading every word, then signing deliberately. This is willing participation. I looked at the date, June 2023, 19 months ago. Vivica's birthday had been that month. We'd celebrated together, all of us. Estelle, Brent, Vivica, Ren, me, cake and candles, and Ren singing off key. The next week, apparently, my wife sat in Floyd's shop, signing documents to steal everything I owned. What did Brent offer her? My voice sounded distant, like someone else was asking. 40%. After you sign the property transfer after the divorce is filed, she gets 40% of the liquidated assets. She agreed 18 months ago. 40%. Not love, not passion, not even revenge for some wrong I'd committed. Just 40% of the money. Floyd scrolled through more photos. Different dates, same scene. My wife and my son-in-law meeting regularly at a flower shop they thought was safe, planning the systematic theft of my life savings and property. "How long?" I asked. "How long has she been—" I couldn't finish the sentence. 18 months, Floyd said quietly. First meeting was May 14th, 2023. I have every single one documented. Dates, times, duration. 11 meetings with both of them present. 7 more with just Brent. I looked down at my left hand. Gold wedding band worn thin after 40 years. I'd put it on in 1984 in a courthouse with discount flowers and believed it meant something permanent. 18 months, 40%, 40 years. Yet she chose this, I said, not a question. Yes, she chose this. Floyd closed the tablet. The photos disappeared, but the truth remained. My wife wasn't a victim of Brent's manipulation. She was his business partner. For a year and a half, while I ate breakfast across from her, while she kissed me goodnight, while she planned her 65th birthday party, she was also planning how to steal my house and divorce me for profit. And in less than 2 hours at her birthday party, they expected me to sign papers making their partnership profitable. Except they weren't going to get what they expected, because 6 months before I found out the full truth, my instincts had already told me enough. 6 months before that birthday party, before Floyd showed me the notebook, before I knew the full scope of the betrayal, I walked into my attorney's office and asked a single question. How do I make sure no one can take my assets, no matter what I sign? June 2024. Martin Caldwell's office in downtown Hartford, 4th floor of a building older than I was. Antique furniture walls lined with leather-bound legal books. Persian rug that had been there since I first walked through that door 30 years ago to set up my will when Vivica was 8 years old. Martin sat across the mahogany desk, 62 silver hair, reading glasses on a chain around his neck. 3 decades of handling my estate planning and corporate paperwork. He knew when a client was asking hypothetical questions and when they were preparing for war. I sat down in the leather chair that had molded to my shape over 30 years of meetings. Martin, hypothetically, if I wanted to ensure no one could take my assets, even if I signed papers giving them permission, what would I need to do? And weint and pret ich bin da Bastard. He set down his pen, looked at me carefully. "Are you in danger? Harlan, is someone threatening you?" "Not yet." I met his eyes. "But I need to be ready if they do." He was quiet for a moment, the way lawyers get when they're shifting from casual conversation to serious legal strategy. "Irrevocable charitable remainders trust," he said finally. "It's the only legal structure that protects assets even from your own signature, but it's permanent. You understand what that means." "Explain it to me." He pulled out a yellow legal pad, started drawing a diagram I'd see in my sleep for months afterward. You transfer your assets, house savings, investment accounts, company shares, into a charitable trust. The assets become property of the trust, managed by an independent trustee according to terms you set now. You remain the lifetime beneficiary, receiving income from the trust until you die. After your death, remaining assets go to designated charities. He tapped the diagram. And here's the critical part, that once you establish an irrevocable charitable trust, the assets are no longer legally yours. You're a lifetime beneficiary receiving income, but the principal belongs to the trust, forever. You cannot sell them, cannot mortgage them, cannot transfer them, and neither can anyone else, even with your signature. What if I change my mind? You can't. That's what irrevocable means. Martin's voice was steady, making sure I understood. Even you cannot undo this. Any papers you sign afterward attempting to transfer, sell, or mortgage those assets legally meaningless. The trust owns them, not you. And the trust is bound by its founding documents. How do you protect yourself from signing away everything you own? You make sure you no longer own it. I looked out the window at Hartford's skyline, the city where I'd built my business from nothing, where I'd bought my first house with Estelle in 1984, where I'd raised my daughter and thought I understood what family meant. Brent's questions at that first dinner 8 years ago, the consulting expenses that jumped 340%, Vivica's distance at Christmas. I didn't have proof yet. Didn't have Floyd's notebook or photos or documentation. Just instinct. Just 35 years of reading people and situations and knowing when something was fundamentally wrong. I turned back to Martin. And how long does it take to draft the documents? 2 weeks. To file with the state register with federal authorities, make it legally binding 4 weeks total. Do it now. Martin studied my face. This is permanent, Harlan. Once these papers are signed and filed, you cannot reverse this decision. Ever. Even if circumstances change. Even if you desperately need those assets for something else. Are you certain? I thought about Estelle setting the table for her birthday party. About Brent and his expensive suits, driving expensive cars on a salary that shouldn't support that lifestyle. About my daughter's eyes not meeting mine across the Christmas table. I'm certain that if someone tries to take everything I've built, they'll find the vault empty. Martin nodded once. Then we'll start immediately. 2 weeks later, I sat in that same chair, reviewing documents. Irrevocable Charitable Remainder Trust, established June 21st, 2024. Principal assets: residential property at 447 Maple Street, Hartford, assessed value $1.4 million. Savings account at Hartford Federal Credit Union, $620,000. Company shares: Mercer Climate Solutions, minority shareholder position, estimated value $400,000. Total $2.4 million, give or take. I signed my name on 9 different pages, initialed 14 more. Martin's paralegal notarized everything, her stamp pressing into the paper with official finality. 2 weeks after that, Martin called. It's registered, he said. Connecticut Department of Justice has it on file. Federal government has been notified. The trust is active and binding. So if someone shows up with papers trying to transfer my house, those papers are worthless. You don't own the house to transfer. The trust does. And the trust's founding documents prohibit any such transfer for the duration of your natural life. 4 weeks. Irreversible. Empty vault. I received the confirmation letter a week later. Official letterhead from the State of Connecticut Department of Justice Charitable Trust Division. Registration number, filing date, summary of terms. I read it once, folded it precisely, and placed it in my safe deposit box at the bank. That was June. By July, Floyd started noticing Brent's visits to the flower shop. By August, Floyd had enough suspicion to start documenting everything. By September, Brent and Estelle were deep into their conspiracy meeting, regularly signing agreements for how they'd split the assets after I signed them over. By December, they'd chosen tonight, Estelle's birthday party, as the moment to strike. And not one of them knew. Not Brent, not Estelle, not the lawyer Lyle, who was sitting in my dining room right now preparing documents. Not one of them realized that the house worth $1.4 million, the savings worth $620,000, the company shares worth $400,000. All of it was already gone. Not stolen, protected, locked behind legal walls even I couldn't break through. They'd been planning to rob a vault I'd emptied 6 months before they started planning the robbery. That gave me one kind of protection, but Floyd had shown me something else, something that explained why protecting my assets hadn't protected my family. You can steal money, property, even a marriage, but the cruelest theft is when someone takes your child and makes her believe you're the villain. Back in Floyd's kitchen that afternoon, after he'd shown me the conspiracy photos after the gambling debt revelation, he'd slid one more manila folder across the table between our coffee cups. "This is the part I almost didn't tell you," he said quietly. "Because once you know this, you can't unknow it." I opened the folder. Inside, printouts of text message records, a receipt from a convenience store 6 miles from my house. Purchase date, May 7th, 2022. Item, TracFone prepaid mobile phone. Payment method, cash. No name recorded. Below that, security camera, still from the same store. Grainy black and white, but unmistakable. Estelle at the counter, cash in hand, buying a phone designed to be untraceable. "She bought this phone specifically to destroy your relationship with Vivica," Floyd said. "Cash purchase, no name, untraceable, except I still have contacts at the security company that services that chain. They keep footage for 2 years. My hands had gone numb holding the photo. "What messages?" Floyd pulled out his laptop, opened 2 windows side by side. 14 texts over 8 months, May through December 2022. All addressed to someone named Claire, all affectionate, all written to sound like you were having an affair. She sent them to Vivica from the burner phone, but spoofed your number so they appeared to come from you. Left screen showed messages Vivica had received supposedly from my phone. May 18th. Can't wait to see you Thursday, Claire. You make everything better. June 22nd. Last night was perfect. I wish we didn't have to hide this. August 4th. Thinking about you, always. September 15th. Meeting you was the best thing that's happened to me in years. 14 messages, each one carefully crafted to sound like me having an affair. Floyd pointed to the right screen. Here's what you actually texted on those same dates. May 18th, compressor shipment delayed. Can we push install to Friday? Sent to my warehouse manager. June 22nd, dinner at 7. Your choice of restaurant, sent to Estelle. August 4th, reminder poker night moved to Tuesday. Group text to my Friday night card game. September 15th, happy birthday, sweetheart, love you, sent to Vivica. Not one word matched, not one sentiment. Complete fabrication message by message, month by month, building a false narrative of betrayal while I texted about compressor shipments and dinner reservations. She's thought I was cheating on Estelle for 2 years, I said quietly, based on messages I never sent. Yes, and Estelle made sure Vivica found them. Accidentally left her phone unlocked. Casually mentioned you'd been distant lately. Asked if Vivica noticed anything different about your behavior. Classic gaslighting technique, plant the evidence, then act concerned. What do you call it when someone doesn't just turn your child against you, but builds an entire false history to justify it? I closed the laptop. Couldn't look at those messages anymore. My daughter had believed for 2 years that I was betraying her mother, that I was a liar, that I was the kind of man who'd throw away 40 years of marriage for someone named Claire who didn't even exist. Every Christmas dinner where she wouldn't meet my eyes. Every birthday call that went to voicemail. Every time I tried to see Ren and Vivica, found a reason to say no. All of it built on messages I never sent from a phone Estelle bought with cash, specifically to frame me. There's one more thing you should know, Floyd said. He pulled up another photo on his laptop. November 23rd, 3 weeks ago. The photo showed my car, parked on a suburban street I recognized immediately, Vivica's street in Avon, 2 houses down from hers. Evening leaves on the ground porch, lights glowing. You were watching me. I was documenting Estelle's movements that night. She went to Vivica's house for dinner. I followed her. Then I saw your car. I remembered that night. Late November, cold, getting dark early. I'd driven to Avon without planning to. Just found myself on her street parking, where I could see her house without being obvious. 40 minutes I'd sat there, watching my daughter through glass and distance and 2 years of lies that I couldn't bridge. Second floor window lit. Vivica's silhouette passing back and forth. Ren's smaller shadow at the desk, doing homework art project, probably construction paper and glue. Vivica taught art. Taught Ren to love color the same way she'd taught me to love her when she was born, and I held her for the first time and understood what unconditional meant. I'd pulled out my phone, typed, "I miss you," finger hovered over send, deleted it. Typed, "Can we talk?" Deleted. Typed, "Vivica, your mother is lying to you." Stared at those words for a full minute. Deleted. How do you prove you didn't send messages that look exactly like they came from your number? How do you tell your daughter her mother is framing you when she believes her mother is the victim? I could prove anything to a court. Burner phone receipts, spoofed numbers, timeline, discrepancies, digital forensics, showing the messages never touched my actual device. Any lawyer would take one look at Floyd's evidence and know we'd win. But I didn't know how to prove to my daughter that I wasn't who she thought I was. Couldn't undo 2 years of believing something false with a simple, "that wasn't me." 3 messages typed, 3 messages deleted, 0 sent. I'd put the phone away, started the engine, driven home through streets that all looked the same in the dark, pulled into my driveway where Estelle's car sat in its usual spot, walked into my house where my wife of 40 years was probably making dinner and planning my destruction. Floyd closed the laptop in his kitchen. The evidence disappeared from the screen, but remained in the folder in the photos and the digital trail that proved everything. "I can prove all of this in court," I said. "Yes, you can win every legal battle there is to win. But winning in court doesn't win back my daughter." "No," Floyd said quietly. "For that you need something else." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out one more folder, thicker than the others. This one had a name written on the tab in Floyd's block handwriting. Brent Townsend, prior history. I opened it. What Floyd gave me wasn't hope for my daughter. It was proof that what Brent did to me, he'd done before to someone else's father, using the exact same playbook. The first page was a court filing. Hamilton County, Ohio. Case number stamped in the top right corner. Civil lawsuit filed March 2016. Plaintiff Robert J. Morrison, 70 years old, owner of Morrison Industrial Supply. Defendant Brent Allen Townsend, Chief Financial Officer. Allegations: unauthorized withdrawal of consulting fees totaling $180,000 over a 3-year period. Breach of fiduciary duty, fraud. I read it twice. "I found this 6 months ago," Floyd said. "Ran a background check the day you told me Brent was taking over your company. Took me 3 months to get the sealed court records through old contacts." The same pattern. Floyd nodded. Identical. Family business. Older owner who trusted him. Son-in-law position: Brent married Morrison's daughter in 2013. Gained financial control. Started with small consulting fees that looked legitimate. Escalated over 3 years until Morrison noticed the numbers didn't add up. What happened? Settled out of court. Amount undisclosed, but Morrison's lawyer told my contact it was barely 20 cents on the dollar. Morrison wanted to avoid publicity because his daughter was still married to Brent at the time. By the time the case settled, they were divorced. Brent walked away, moved to Connecticut, and found you. I stared at the filing. Robert Morrison, 70 years old, built a business, trusted his son-in-law, lost nearly $200,000, and probably his relationship with his daughter in the process. "You weren't the first, Harlan," Floyd said quietly. "Just the biggest target. Mercer Climate is worth more than Morrison Industrial Supply ever was. Your house is worth more. Your savings are deeper. To Brent, you were the upgrade. How many families has he done this to? How many fathers sat exactly where I'm sitting, discovering too late they married their daughter to a professional thief?" Floyd closed that folder and opened his laptop. Bank records filled the screen, months of transactions I recognized from my own quarterly reports, but never questioned, because the amount seemed reasonable and Brent always had explanations. 2 shell companies, Floyd said, pointing at the screen. Townsend Strategic Consulting, registered in Delaware. NE Asset Partners, LLC, registered in Nevada. Both list Brent as managing director. Both receive quarterly payments from Mercer Climate Solutions for consulting services that were never actually performed. He scrolled through the records. April 2022, $28,000 to Townsend Strategic. August 2022, $15,000 to NE Asset Partners. November 2022, $32,000 split between both. The pattern continued quarter after quarter, adding up to numbers that made my chest tighten. Over 3 years, Floyd said, doing the math, I could already see $247,000. Withdrawn from your company using fake consulting contracts funneled through shells, then distributed some to the gambling network to service his debt, the rest into offshore accounts I'm still tracing. That's wire fraud, I said. Federal crime. That's why Detective Simone Garrett already contacted the FBI. After tonight's arrest on the elder abuse and conspiracy charges, this becomes a federal investigation. Brent won't just lose his freedom for a few years, he'll lose decades. Floyd pulled out his phone, dialed a number he had saved under a single letter G. 2 rings, a woman's voice answered. "Garrett, Simone, it's Floyd. I have Harlan here, putting you on speaker." The voice that came through was calm, professional, the tone of someone who'd coordinated operations like this before. "Mr. Mercer, we've been planning this for 2 weeks. You understand what you're walking into tonight. And down the Starkestaus." "I understand," I said. "Then let's confirm the sequence. You enter the party normally, greet guests, play the gracious host. When Brent presents the papers, you take the pen, but don't sign. You say what exactly? That I want to listen to something first. And you play the recording Floyd provided, the one from this afternoon at the flower shop." "Yes." "At that point, you text me the rose emoji. We're parked 3 houses down, me and 2 officers. We enter within 60 seconds with the arrest warrant. Lyle Prescott gets escorted out first to prevent any document destruction." "Questions?" "Estelle. We'll need her statement, but the charges are against Brent primarily. Her involvement depends on what she says and what we find in discovery. This is about stopping him, Mr. Mercer. The rest follows." I looked at Floyd. He was watching me carefully, giving me space to back out if I wanted. "Harlan," Detective Garrett said, voice softer now, "are you absolutely sure? Once I walk through that door with a warrant, there's no going back. Your wife will know. Your guests will know. This becomes public record." "I've been sure since the moment I heard her call my roses tacky," I said. Everything after that was just gathering proof. Silence on the line. Then, "Okay, we move at 7:15 p.m. Text when ready." The call ended. Floyd and I sat in his kitchen as the afternoon light started fading. 4 p.m. now. 3 hours until the party. 3 hours until 40 years of marriage ended, and my son-in-law discovered that stealing from me had been the worst decision of his life. "You could still handle this through lawyers?" Floyd said. "Quiet settlement, no public arrest, no scene in front of 12 dinner guests." I stood, picked up the bouquet of 12 red roses from the counter where Dorothy had wrapped them hours ago, looked Floyd in the eye. "I spent 40 years building quietly," I said. "They can lose everything loudly." Floyd stood too, extended his hand. I shook it firm. "Grip old friend to old friend. And then let's go ruin them," he said. 40 years building, 1 night destroying. Fair trade. I walked out of that flower shop at 3:20 in the afternoon, roses in hand, every piece of evidence documented, every move planned with precision. 4 hours until Estelle's birthday party. 4 hours until Brent and Estelle and Lyle sat at my dining room table, expecting me to sign away everything I'd built over 35 years of work. They had no idea the vault was already empty. They had no idea Detective Garrett was coordinating with the FBI. They had no idea Floyd had 7 months of surveillance. All they knew was that predictable old Harlan always showed up with roses on his wife's birthday and never asked hard questions. Those 4 hours passed like water through my hands. By 7 o'clock, I was standing in my living room, watching my wife transform into someone I'd stopped recognizing. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock, and I watched my wife's face transform into something I no longer recognized, the smile of a woman who believed she'd already won. "I'll get it," Estelle called, voice bright and warm. She smoothed her burgundy silk dress, the one I'd bought for our anniversary 2 years ago. The first guests arrived. Neighbors Estelle's book club, friends, people who had no idea they were walking into a trap. I played my role, shook hands, smiled. The house smelled like rosemary and garlic from catered food, baked brie, roasted vegetables, herb chicken. Crystal champagne glasses lined the dining room table. Brent stood in the corner with Lyle Prescott, 51 sharp suit leather briefcase at his feet, eyes tracking movement with calculation. They weren't hiding. They wanted me to see them waiting. I caught Brent's eye. He raised his champagne glass. I nodded back. 2 men who understood exactly what tonight meant, pretending we were family. More guests arrived. December cold rushed in with each opening door. 12 people total, enough to make it a party. Enough to make what came next feel public. Estelle moved through the room like she was hosting a celebration instead of planning robbery. She touched arms, laughed, thanked people for coming. The performance was flawless. 7:15. Party in full swing. Someone had started the playlist soft jazz. I held a champagne glass I hadn't drunk from cataloging faces and exits, and the placement of Brent's briefcase. The doorbell rang again. Estelle frowned. I think everyone's here already. I opened the door. Viveka stood on the porch alone. No Brent beside her, which was unusual because they always arrived together. Her eyes met mine no distance for the first time in 2 years. "Dad," she said quietly, then stepped forward and hugged me. The champagne glass shook in my hand. Liquid sloshed. A guest nearby noticed. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Fine, just glad to see my daughter." Viveka pulled back. Her perfume was the same jasmine scent from high school. Her hands trembled. "Can we talk?" she whispered. "Privately?" I glanced across the room. Brent was watching. So was Lyle. "My studies," I said. We walked through the party into my study at the back of the house. I closed the door. Viveka turned to face me, eyes wet. "If Floyd sent me everything," she said. 3 days ago. Photos, bank records, the burner phone receipts. All of it. My chest tightened. 3 days? I didn't know how to. Her voice broke. "Dad, I thought you were having an affair. For 2 years I thought you were betraying Mom, and I hated you for it, and I was so wrong." "Stop." I put my hands on her shoulders. "You have nothing to apologize for. Your mother built that lie carefully. You believed what you were supposed to believe. But I should have asked you. And I should have fought harder, instead of sitting outside your house deleting messages I was too afraid to send." I met her eyes. "We were both victims. That ends tonight." She wiped her face. "Floyd said you have a plan." "I do, but I need your help. Anything. When I give you the signal, I touch my left ear twice. You take Ren upstairs immediately. Get her out before things happen that she's too young to see." Viveka nodded. "What's going to happen?" "Justice." We stood in silence, father and daughter reunited by shared betrayal. "I missed you," she said quietly. "I missed you too." A knock on the study door. We both froze. Brent's voice came through. "Everything okay in there?" Viveka straightened, wiped her face, looked at me with something I hadn't seen in 2 years, trust. "We should go back," she said. I opened the door. Brent stood in the hallway, Lyle directly behind him. Close. Too close. Just catching up," I said, keeping my voice light. "Haven't had a real conversation with my daughter in a while." Brent's eyes moved between us, calculating, suspicious. "What were you talking about?" "Family," Viveka said, voice steady. "Things we should have talked about years ago." We stepped past them into the hallway. Party noise grew louder, conversations, laughter, glasses clinking. From across the room, Ren's laugh cut through the noise. She was showing someone her new shoes, red velvet, to match her dress, spinning, so the fabric swirled. 7 years old and untouched by knowledge that her father was a thief and her grandmother a co-conspirator. That's why she had to leave before it happened. Why Viveka's signal mattered more than anything. Brent moved closer. His cologne was overwhelming citrus and cedar, expensive like everything about him. When he spoke, his voice had an edge I'd never heard. "You two seem close all of a sudden." Lyle's hand settled on Brent's shoulder, firm, steadying or restraining, I couldn't tell. But I could tell this Lyle's hand tightened on Brent's shoulder, and I realized with cold clarity that the lawyer wasn't here to help present documents. He was here because they'd moved up their timeline. I needed to stay calm, but calm became harder when I realized they knew something had changed. I was 3 steps from the kitchen when I heard my son-in-law's voice drop to a whisper that made my blood stop. "He knows something." Brent's voice came through the gap where the kitchen door stood ajar. I can feel it. The way he looked at Lyle, the way Viveka pulled him aside. I stopped in the hallway. Guests were talking in the living room behind me, jazz playing softly normal party sounds that had nothing to do with the conspiracy unfolding 15 feet ahead. Estelle's voice lower, calmer. "He doesn't know anything. He never does. You're being paranoid." "Am I?" Brent's tone sharpened. His daughter hasn't spoken to him in 2 years. Suddenly tonight she shows up late alone, pulls him into private conversation, and they come out looking like allies. That's not paranoid. That's pattern recognition. Silence. I could picture Estelle's face, the calculations running behind her eyes. "What do you want to do?" she asked finally. "We move at dessert, not after. At dessert. Before he has time to think, before Viveka can warn him about anything, before this night goes any direction except the one we planned. And if he doesn't sign..." Brent's pause lasted 3 seconds. Then Lyle explains what happens to people who owe money they can't pay, how accidents happen, how houses burn down, how granddaughters get caught in fires. My hand found the wall, steadied myself. Every instinct told me to walk through that door immediately. But bursting in now would give Brent time to destroy the documents, time to call people I didn't want, called time to run, before Detective Garrett could position her officers. Wren was upstairs, safe. The officers were 3 houses down, 60 seconds away when I sent the signal. The fastest way to protect my granddaughter was to finish what I'd started. I had 2 choices: walk into that kitchen and end this now, or play the role a little longer. I chose the role. Walked forward, pushed the kitchen door open, smiled. "Nash, there you are," I said, voice cheerful, oblivious. "Estelle, are we serving dessert soon?" Guests are asking. Estelle jumped. Actual physical startle. Her hand went to her chest. Harlan, we were just discussing timing." Brent finished, smoothly stepping forward with his practiced smile. "I was thinking of making a toast before dessert. Something about family and gratitude, if that's all right with you." He stood close. Too close. I could smell his cologne again, see the calculation in his eyes. "Of course," I said. "Estelle deserves a proper toast." Exactly what I was thinking. Brent's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Family takes care of family. That's what tonight's about." He walked past me, shoulder brushing mine, deliberate contact, establishing dominance, making sure I knew he was in control. Estelle recovered her composure, touched my arm. "Are you all right, honey? You look pale." "Fine, just hungry." "Dinner's ready. Let's get everyone seated." We returned to the party. Guests migrated to the dining room. The table I'd built 30 years ago, set with china we'd received as wedding gifts, holding food, meant to celebrate a woman who was helping steal everything I owned. I sat at the head, Estelle at the other end, Brent to my right, Lyle to my left, Vivica across from me with Wren beside her. 12 people total, arranged like pieces on a board, neither side controlled completely. Food was served, conversation started. I moved my fork, cut my chicken, pretended to eat. While my hands gripped the plate so hard, my wedding ring cut into the adjacent finger. The pain was sharp, focusing a reminder that I was still here, still performing, still in control even though Brent had accelerated everything. Before I show you what happened when Brent stood to speak, are you still with me? Comment A, if you think I should reveal everything now, or B, if I should wait for Brent to incriminate himself. Add one reason. What follows contains some recreated dialogue for storytelling purposes. The core truth is what matters. Dessert arrived, cake with candles. Estelle hadn't blown out yet. Coffee in cups that matched the china. Everything civilized and normal, except for the briefcase sitting at Lyle's feet, and the threat Brent had made in the kitchen about granddaughters and fires. I looked at Vivica, caught her eye, touched my left ear twice. She understood immediately. "Wren's sweetheart," Vivica said, standing. "Past your bedtime. Let's go upstairs." "But I want birthday cake." Wren's voice carried that 7-year-old protest that expected negotiation. "We'll save you a piece," Vivica said firmly, taking her hand. "But Grandma hasn't blown out candles yet. We'll tell you all about it tomorrow." Wren looked at me confused why the fun was ending. I smiled at her, the most genuine smile I'd managed all night. "Good night, little one. Sweet dreams." "Good night, Grandpa." Vivica led her toward the stairs. I watched them go, my daughter protecting my granddaughter from what came next, just like we'd planned. Estelle was watching too. "Why is she leaving?" "School night," Vivica said, without turning around. "She needs sleep." The lie was smooth, natural. Estelle accepted it with a nod and turned back to her guests. But Brent was watching me, and Lyle was watching Brent. Footsteps on the stairs, Vivica and Wren disappearing to the second floor, a door closing somewhere above us. Wren was safe. Brent stood, his chair scraped against hardwood. Lyle's hand moved beneath the table toward the briefcase, I assumed checking it was still there. Brent picked up his champagne glass, tapped it with a knife. The crystal rang clear and bright, cutting through conversation. "I'd like to say something," he announced. The room quieted. 12 guests turned toward him. Estelle smiled. I sat very still. The crystal chandelier above the dining table flickered, once bulb dying, or omen, I couldn't tell. Under the chandelier's light, Brent raised his glass like a man who believed he had already won. No one at that table knew the toast was a trap. Every person in that room thought they were about to hear a birthday toast. Only 4 of us knew what was really happening. "I want to honor." Brent began his voice, carrying the exact warmth of a son who'd never planned to destroy his family. Not just Estelle's birthday, but everything Harlan built over 40 years. He paused. Let the words settle. Guests nodded, smiled, raised their glasses slightly in anticipation of the toast to come. A man like Harlan, Brent turned toward me, glass still raised, who built a company from nothing, who provided for his family, who created something that will outlast all of us. A man like that deserves peace of mind. More nods. Someone murmured agreement. I sat very still. Peace of mind. Brent continued, knowing that everything he worked for will be protected for generations, that his legacy won't be lost to probate courts or estate taxes or legal complications. His performance was flawless. Voice steady, eyes sincere, every gesture calculated to appear spontaneous. If I didn't know what he'd stolen, what he owed, what he'd threatened in the kitchen 20 minutes ago, I would believe him myself. Which is why Brent set his glass down. With Harlan's blessing, Lyle and I have prepared something special tonight. Lyle opened his briefcase. The leather creaked. Papers emerged, official-looking, bound with blue backing sheets that made them look important and legitimate. Just estate planning, Brent said smoothly. Documents to protect what matters most, to ensure that when the time comes years from now, God willing, everything Harlan built passes smoothly to the people he loves. Lyle slid the papers across the table. They landed beside my dinner plate with a soft whisper of expensive bond paper. A pen followed. Black ink gold, clipped the kind lawyers use for signing important documents. Guests were smiling. This looked generous, thoughtful. A son-in-law helping his father-in-law prepare for the inevitable while everyone was together for a celebration. Estelle's hand covered mine. Warm, familiar. 40 years of that hand touching mine across dinner tables. "Just paperwork, darling," she whispered. "For us, for our family." I looked down at the documents. The top page had my name in bold letters. Below that dense legal text I would need to read carefully to understand. Except I already knew what it said. Property transfer authorization, power of attorney, documents that would sign away my house, my savings, everything I'd protected 6 months ago in Martin Caldwell's office. Documents that were worthless because I no longer owned what they were designed to steal. My thumb found my phone in my pocket, rested on the screen through the fabric, one tap away from ending 43 years of marriage, one tap away from destroying the woman sitting at the other end of this table, watching me with eyes that believed I was still the fool she'd been married to for 4 decades. Brent sat down, folded his hands, watched me with the patience of someone who thought he'd already won. "Take your time," he said. "Read it thoroughly. I want you to understand exactly what you're signing." The irony would have been funny if it wasn't happening at my dining room table in front of 12 witnesses. I picked up the pen, felt its weight. Expensive. Everything about this moment was designed to feel important, official, irreversible. Guests had returned to their dessert, giving us privacy for this family moment. The room filled with the soft sounds of forks on china coffee being poured, quiet conversations resuming. I pulled out my phone. Brent's eyes sharpened. "Is something wrong?" "And just checking the time," I said. "Want to make sure we don't keep everyone too late." My thumb moved across the screen. 3 taps. The emoji keyboard opened. 1 more tap. Rose emoji. Send. The message disappeared into the digital void. 3 houses away, Detective Simone Garrett's phone would light up with a single flower, and she would know it was time. I pocketed my phone, looked at the documents again. "And these are comprehensive," I said, buying time. Lyle did thorough work. Lyle inclined his head. We wanted to ensure everything was covered. No ambiguity. "Of course." I turned pages, pretended to read. "And this transfers everything House Savings Company shares." "Everything you specified," Brent said. "Complete protection for your assets." "Complete," I repeated. Outside, 3 houses down, Detective Garrett sat in an unmarked sedan with 2 uniformed officers. I knew this because Floyd had confirmed it before I left his shop. I knew she'd received my text because we'd planned this exact moment down to the minute. I knew that in exactly 2 minutes, she would knock on my front door with an arrest warrant. I just had to keep performing for 120 more seconds. "This clause here," I said, pointing to random text, "about the beneficiary designation. Can you clarify?" Brent leaned forward, explained something about trust structures and tax implications. His voice was smooth, confident, the voice of someone who'd done this before in Ohio, to a 70-year-old business owner who'd trusted his son-in-law right up until the moment he realized he'd been robbed. Estelle refilled my coffee. The gesture was automatic, domestic, 40 years of muscle memory. that had nothing to do with the conspiracy she'd been planning for 18 months. A faint sound came from outside. Car door closing, soft, distant. Most people wouldn't notice over the dinner conversation and background music. But I noticed, and my breath caught. Brent noticed my reaction. "Are you all right?" "Fine. Just want to make sure I understand everything before I sign." "Of course. Take all the time you need." But his eyes said something different. His eyes said, "Sign now, old man, before this night goes somewhere you don't control." I picked up the pen again. 3 houses away, the rose emoji was doing its job. I gave Brent exactly 2 more minutes of thinking he had already won. Down the street, the rose emoji had already signaled Detective Garrett to move. Brent had exactly 2 minutes left of thinking he'd won. But first, I needed to remember why this moment mattered, why I couldn't just walk away from what they'd tried to do. The windshield had been intact when I went to bed by 6 a.m. A week ago. Thursday it wore a spiderweb crack and a note that read, "Clock's ticking, old man." December 6th. Thursday morning. I'd walked out to my garage in darkness, coffee in hand, planning to drive to the hardware store before it got busy. Early morning fog hung low over the street, that thick December cold that makes everything feel muffled and distant. The crack spread across the driver's side windshield like frozen lightning. Center impact point where something heavy had struck it, rock maybe or hammer. The glass hadn't shattered completely, just fractured into 1,000 connected pieces held together by the laminate between layers. The note sat under the wiper blade, white paper folded once. I pulled it out with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. "Clock's ticking, old man. Make it easy." No signature, no explanation needed. I knew who sent it. Knew that Brent's debt to the gambling network had reached the point where they were sending messages to motivate him. Knew that I was collateral in a world where people who couldn't pay got hospitalized. I took my phone from my pocket, photographed the windshield from 3 angles, photographed the note, called Floyd. "They just escalated," I said when he answered. "How bad?" "Windshield," threatening note. "They came to my house while I was sleeping." Silence on the line. Then, "Keep everything as is. Don't touch the windshield. I'll document it and add it to the file. This moves it from fraud to criminal intimidation. That's federal." They were in my driveway, Floyd, while Estelle was sleeping upstairs, while I know. I'd stood in my garage, note in hand, looking at my cracked windshield and understanding something I'd never understood before, what it felt like to be afraid in your own home. First time in my life, I was scared to leave my house, scared that leaving meant coming back to find something worse than a broken windshield. That's when I knew there was no choice but to end this. Not lawyers, not quiet settlements, not walking away. Ending it completely, publicly, permanently. The transition from flashback to present, from cracked windshield to dining room chandelier, felt like surfacing from underwater. I was sitting at my table, pen in hand, documents in front of me, 12 guests pretending to eat dessert while watching this family moment unfold. Brent across from me, with that patient expression. Lyle beside me, with his briefcase already closed. Estelle at the far end, hands folded, waiting for me to sign away everything, like the predictable old fool they thought I was. I looked at the documents, property transfer authorization at the top of the stack. Below that, business power of attorney. Yellow sticky tabs marking where I should sign, professional, official, fraudulent. I put the pen down, not threw it, not slammed it, just set it down carefully beside the papers with the quiet finality of a decision made. Brent noticed immediately. "Is something unclear?" "No, it's all very clear." "Then, before I sign anything," I said, voice calm and steady, "I'd like everyone to hear something." I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone. The same phone I'd used to send the rose emoji 3 minutes ago. The same phone that held a recording Floyd had helped me make this afternoon in his flower shop. Brent's expression changed. Subtle shift. The confident patience replaced by something sharper, more alert. Oh, it was Harlan. He said, voice tight in a way I'd never heard before. "The documents are straightforward. There's nothing that requires—" "I'm sure they are," I interrupted. "But first this." I set the phone on the table, turned the volume to maximum. My thumb found the play button. Estelle leaned forward. "Honey, what are you—" "Just listen," I said. Brent's hands pressed flat against the table. Lyle's hand moved toward Brent's arm. Stopped, withdrew. The room had gone quiet. Guests had stopped pretending to eat. Everyone was watching now this family moment that had suddenly become something else. My thumb hovered over the play button. One tap and everything Brent and Estelle had planned for 18 months would unravel in front of 12 witnesses. One tap and 40 years of marriage would end in a recording made in a flower shop 4 hours ago. Brent was staring at my phone, his jaw tight. The perpetual confidence I'd seen since that first dinner in 2016, when he'd asked those 2 specific questions about my business, had cracked. His eyes showed something I'd never seen before: fear. "You don't want to do this," he said quietly. "Actually," I replied, "I've been ready for this since the moment I understood what that single word meant." Estelle's face went pale. She understood then. Understood that I'd been in Floyd's shop. Understood that I'd heard something I wasn't supposed to hear. Lyle started to stand. "Mr. Mercer, as legal counsel, I must advise—" "Sit down," I said, not loud, not aggressive, just final. He sat. My thumb hovered over the play button, phone speaker aimed at 12 witnesses who had no idea their pleasant dinner party was about to become a crime scene. Brent's eyes, for the first time since 2016, showed something other than confidence recognition, that he'd been outplayed. I pressed play, and my son-in-law's voice filled the dining room like poison gas. "Tonight he'll sign," Brent's recorded voice said, clarity perfect despite the flower shop's background noise. "After this birthday party, the house savings account business residuals, everything will be ours." A woman's voice responded. Estelle's voice unmistakable even through phone static, finally. The single word landed like a grenade. 12 faces turned toward the sound. Conversation died mid-sentence. Marcus Vance's wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. Eleanor Bradford's fork clattered against her plate. The candles Vivica had arranged down the table's center line flickered in the sudden stillness, casting shadows that made everyone look guilty. Only Brent moved, standing so abruptly his chair scraped backwards 6 inches, leaving marks on Vivica's hardwood floor. "Dad, what is this?" His voice carried the exact tone he'd used in 2019 when questioning vendor invoices, reasonable confusion, masking calculation. I didn't answer. Let the recording speak. Brent again from 3 days ago. "The old man trusts everyone. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him." "Estelle, what about Floyd?" "Brent, Floyd's a coward. He won't say anything that matters." Floyd, sitting 3 chairs down from me, went rigid. His face flushed crimson jaw, working like he wanted to speak but couldn't find words. I'd warned him this moment was coming. Hearing yourself called a coward in front of strangers hits different than reading it in a transcript. Vivica's gasp came from the staircase. I hadn't heard her descend, but there she stood on the 3rd step, one hand gripping the banister, face drained of color. She wore the blue cardigan I'd given her last Christmas, the one she claimed made her look like a librarian but wore anyway because I'd chosen it. Our eyes met across 20 feet of polished oak and Persian carpet. I saw the exact moment she understood, not just what Brent had done, but what I'd known, what I'd carried alone for 7 months, while she pulled away believing lies about affairs that never happened. "Vivica?" Brent started toward her. "Don't." Her voice cut like January wind. She descended the remaining steps slowly, deliberately, each footfall deliberate. She crossed to my side of the table and stood beside my chair. Didn't touch me, didn't speak. Just stood there, shoulder aligned with mine, facing the room that had gone silent, except for the recording still playing from my phone speaker. Brent's voice: "Once the papers are signed, we move everything into the LLC by January 2nd. The trust lawyers won't catch it for months." Estelle, and the gambling debt. Brent paid in full by December 17th. Lyle's people get their money, we get clean title to $2.4 million in assets, and Harlan gets to live out his retirement thinking he made generous provisions for his family. Lyle, Brent's supposed friend, the man who'd been watching me all evening with dead eyes, shifted in his seat. Not uncomfortable, calculating. His right hand disappeared beneath the table, moving towards something in his jacket. "Lyle, I wouldn't," I said, quietly, still holding my phone. "Detective Garrett has 2 officers in the driveway. They've been there since 7:45. The hand reappeared empty. Lyle's expression didn't change, but his breathing did shallow, controlled the rhythm of someone reassessing odds. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed felt like standing in a walk-in freezer, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. "This is ridiculous," Brent said, recovering. Always recovering. That's what made him dangerous, the ability to recalculate mid-crisis to find new angles when old ones collapsed. "Dad, someone obviously edited June 18th, 2024. I interrupted, reaching into my jacket pocket. Attorney Martin Caldwell's office, 4th floor of the Riverside building downtown. You remember Martin Vivica handled your grandmother's estate in 2015. I placed the document on the table beside the fraudulent papers Brent had prepared. Navy cover gold, embossing 47 pages of legal language that boiled down to 5 words. You can't touch any of it. Irrevocable charitable remainder. Trust, I said, established 6 months ago. Every asset you thought you were signing away tonight, the house, the investment accounts, the business residuals, the land in Kentucky, the whole $2.4 million, it's already gone. Transferred, protected. Irrevocable means permanent, Brent. You taught me that word in 2019 when you restructured the vendor contracts. Marcus Vance leaned forward, reading upside down. As a tax attorney, he'd recognized the document's legitimacy within seconds. His eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. He glanced at me, then at Brent, understanding spreading across his face like spilled wine. The papers you prepared. I continued tapping the fraudulent documents with one finger. Transfer assets I no longer own. They're worth less than the paper they're printed on. You could have forged my signature and your sleep wouldn't have mattered. You can't steal what isn't there. Brent's face had gone through several colors, red to white to gray. Now it settled on something I'd never seen before, genuine fear. Not the theatrical concern he'd performed when quarterly numbers dipped, but the naked terror of a man realizing he'd bet everything on a con that was already dead. And the debt, he whispered. I nodded. $280,000 to Lyle's Associates. Due December 17th, 4 days from now. I imagine that deadline feels pretty real right about now. Vivica's hand found my shoulder. Her fingers trembled, but her grip was steady. Brent's hands pressed flat against the table. Knuckles' white shoulders hunched like a man trying to hold up a ceiling that was already falling. He stared at the trust document, at the gold, embossing at Martin Caldwell's signature, at the reality that every exit he'd planned had just vaporized. And for the first time since 2016, I watched my son-in-law understand what it meant to have absolutely no way out. Brent's chair hit the floor as he lunged, and I thought for half a second he might actually reach me before the front door opened and Detective Simone Garrett stepped into Vivica's dining room with her badge already raised. You think you're smart? Brent's voice cracked on the last word, hands reaching toward me across the table. You think... Brent Townsend. Detective Garrett's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. She stood in the doorway, 42 compact build, 17 years, with the fraud division flanked by 2 uniformed officers whose hands rested on their belts with practiced calm. I have a warrant for your arrest. Wire fraud, elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit theft. Brent froze mid-lunge, fingers 6 inches from my shoulder. The dining room had gone silent except for someone's breathing. Eleanor Bradford's, I think, coming in short gasps. 12 witnesses who'd come for birthday cake and small talk, now watching a man get arrested at his father-in-law's party, while classical music played softly from Vivica's speaker system. That this is insane, Brent said, straightening. Always performing. I haven't done anything. You have the right to remain silent. Detective Garrett crossed to him, handcuffs already in her left hand. I'd suggest using it. One of the officers, younger, maybe 28, nameplate, reading Morrison, moved to Brent's right side, while Garrett approached from the left, textbook flanking. I'd seen it on television, but never in my daughter's dining room beneath the chandelier her mother helped her choose in 2018. Brent's eyes found mine, not pleading, not apologetic, just calculating, still looking for angles, still trying to find the move that would flip the board. Lyle Prescott. Detective Garrett's voice shifted toward the opposite end of the table, where Lyle sat, motionless, face expressionless as carved wood. You're coming with us too, accessory to wire fraud conspiracy. That stopped the room's breathing entirely. Lyle wasn't just Brent's friend, he was Brent's lawyer. The man who'd structured the fraudulent LLC, drafted the fake transfer documents, helped create the paper trail that looked legitimate enough to fool a man who'd spent 40 years trusting handshakes over contracts. Watching him stand slowly, hands raised in practiced surrender, I understood something I'd missed. This wasn't amateur hour. Brent hadn't stumbled into fraud. He'd hired professional help. Mrs. Mercer? Detective Garrett's gaze shifted to Estelle, who sat frozen 3 chairs down, face pale as December snow. You'll need to remain available for questioning. Don't leave the county. Estelle nodded once, didn't speak, didn't look at me. The handcuffs clicked onto Brent's wrists with a sound like a door locking metallic final, the kind of noise that doesn't leave room for negotiation. Officer Morrison began reciting the rest of the Miranda warning, while the second officer, Keating, her nameplate read, moved to handcuff Lyle. "Dad," Brent tried one last time, voice dropping into the reasonable tone he'd used for 8 years whenever he needed something. "This is a misunderstanding. If you just—" "Don't call me that," I said quietly. Vivica's hand tightened on my shoulder. Across the table, Floyd sat rigid, watching Brent get led toward the door. Marcus Vance had his phone out, not filming, just gripping it like an anchor. The birthday cake Vivica had ordered sat untouched on the sideboard. 65 candles unlit beneath a banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Estelle," in cheerful red letters that now felt obscene. The background music shifted to something classical, Vivaldi maybe, or one of those composers Vivica had programmed into her automated playlist months ago, when she was still planning a normal party. The algorithm didn't know the dinner had become an arrest. Just kept playing, oblivious. Detective Garrett paused at the threshold. "Mr. Mercer, we'll need your formal statement tomorrow, 9 a.m. at the precinct." "I'll be there," I said. The door closed behind them at 8:23 p.m., according to the grandfather clock in Vivica's hallway, the one her grandmother had left her, the one that chimed every 15 minutes with Westminster tones. 2 minutes later, the room remained frozen. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. We'd all just watched a family implode in the time it takes to eat dessert. I stood slowly, Vivica's hand sliding off my shoulder. "Excuse me." The kitchen was empty when I entered, or I thought it was, until I saw Estelle sitting at the island, hands folded in front of her, like she was praying. She wasn't. Just sitting there beneath the pendant lights we'd chosen together in 1986 when we renovated our first house, the ones Vivica had installed here, because she'd loved them in our kitchen growing up. She looked up when I entered. 40 years of marriage, and I'd never seen her face completely without pretense until that moment. No performance, no careful expression. Just exhaustion. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Long enough." The 12 roses I'd bought that afternoon sat on the counter between us, Floyd's careful wrapping the navy ribbon, the small card I'd written, before I understood what the trip to his shop would reveal. They smelled faintly of the flower shop's cooler water, and cut stems, and something chemical meant to keep them fresh longer than they'd naturally survive. "Oh, the roses," she said, "from Floyd's." "And I know you know," I said. She nodded slowly, her hands the same hands that had held our daughter 39 years ago, that had signed our mortgage papers, that had touched my face the morning we buried. Her mother lay flat on the granite countertop, like evidence waiting to be cataloged. "Harlan, don't." The single word landed between us, heavier than the trust document, heavier than the recording, heavier than 40 years of history that had ended the moment she'd said finally when Brent promised her a cut of my assets. I turned away from her, walked toward the doorway. Behind me, she didn't speak, didn't move. Just sat there beneath the light fixture we'd chosen together in 1986, next to the roses that would wilt untouched on the counter, the last gift I'd ever give to a woman who'd stopped deserving them 18 months ago when she'd chosen conspiracy over 40 years of us. The voice from the staircase belonged to the only person in the house who didn't know my marriage had just ended. "Grandpa, where did everyone go?" Wren stood on the landing in her unicorn pajamas, the purple ones with silver stars Vivica had bought her last month, looking down at the dining room like she'd woken into a different house than the one she'd left an hour ago. 7 years old, dark hair tangled from where she'd been lying down, face carrying that bewildered expression children get when adult chaos intrudes on their careful understanding of how the world works. I stepped out of the kitchen doorway, leaving Estelle behind me in the silence I'd created with one word. Vivica appeared from the living room, where she'd been standing with Eleanor Bradford, trying to explain what couldn't be explained. The party ended early, sweetheart Vivica said, voice steady despite everything. Grandpa had some business to handle. Wren descended the stairs, slowly bare feet, silent on carpet, taking in the dining room's transformation. Empty chairs pushed back at odd angles, wine glasses abandoned mid-sip. The birthday banner still hanging cheerful and oblivious above the sideboard where the cake sat untouched. "Did Grandpa blow out the candles?" she asked. I looked at the cake 3 layers chocolate with vanilla buttercream, ordered from the bakery on Maple Street that Vivica had loved since childhood. 65 candles stood unlit in neat rows, waiting for a celebration that had turned into an arrest. "Not yet," I said. You have to blow them out for Grandma. Wren crossed to the sideboard with the gravity of someone enforcing important rules. She left the room, so you have to make the wish for her. Vivica found matches in the sideboard drawer, the long fireplace kind we used for candles when the electricity went out. She began lighting them, starting from the outside and working inward, and I watched 65 small flames come to life one by one. The smell of sulfur gave way to warm wax, and the dining room filled with flickering light that made shadows dance across walls that had witnessed fraud and arrest and the end of everything I'd built. "Okay, Grandpa." Wren positioned herself beside the cake hands, clasped in front of her like a maestro preparing an orchestra. "Make a wish." I looked at the candles, at Wren's face glowing in their light, at Vivica standing behind her daughter with tears tracking silent down her cheeks, at the empty chairs where Brent and Estelle and Lyle had sat an hour ago, and the chairs where Floyd and Marcus and Eleanor had watched my family implode over wine and lies. I took a breath and blew. 65 candles died in 3 exhales, smoke curling upward in thin streams that smelled like birthdays from decades past. The room went dark for half a second before Vivica found the light switch, and when illumination returned, Wren was clapping. "What did you wish for Grandpa?" I looked at my granddaughter 7 years old, protected upstairs, while her father got arrested, still believing the world made sense because the adults around her worked hard to keep it that way. I looked at Vivica, 39 years old, marriage destroyed, standing in the wreckage of her dinner party with mascara-streaked cheeks and her mother's eyes. I wished for her to find peace, I said, and for what matters to stay. Wren frowned processing this. "But you're supposed to wish for something you don't have." "Sometimes," I told her, "you make a wish on behalf of someone who forgot how." Vivica's hand found her mouth. Her shoulders shook once, then steadied. Wren, satisfied with the logic of adults being weird, asked if she could have a piece of cake. Vivica cut her a corner, sliced the piece with the most frosting, and sent her back upstairs to eat it in bed, a rule breaking that felt appropriate for a night when everything else had broken too. The dining room settled into silence after Wren's footsteps faded. Just me and Vivica and the debris of a party that had served its purpose in ways I'd planned and ways I hadn't. The Navy notebook Floyd had given me that afternoon sat on the table where I'd left it before the arrests, 7 months of surveillance condensed into 70 pages of careful documentation. It looked like a gravestone marking the burial of everything I'd thought I knew about the people I'd loved. The front door opened at 9 p.m., according to Vivica's grandfather clock. Floyd stepped inside without knocking. 53 years of friendship earned that privilege and surveyed the dining room with the careful assessment of someone who'd expected chaos, but still needed to see its specific shape. "Are you okay?" he asked. I breathed. Actually breathed. First real breath since I'd pressed play on that recording. "Yeah," I said, "I am." Floyd crossed to Vivica, who stood beside the sideboard, holding the cake knife like she'd forgotten what to do with it. "Vivica, I've known you since you were 5 years old, and your dad brought you to the shop to pick out flowers for your mom's birthday. You're going to be okay." She nodded, not trusting her voice. Floyd lifted the Navy notebook from the table, held it up. "Detective Garrett asked me to make sure this got to her. 7 months of documentation, everything she'll need for the prosecution." "Thank you," I said. The words felt insufficient for what he'd done, the surveillance, the courage to call me that morning in the flower shop, the friendship that had anchored me through 7 months of knowing my marriage was a performance. "Floyd, I've been friends since 9th grade, he said quietly. "I owe you more than that. 53 years, 9th grade to 68. Longer than my marriage, more honest than my marriage, worth more in the end than 40 years of vows that had stopped meaning anything 18 months ago when Estelle chose conspiracy over us." "Dorothy's waiting in the car," Floyd said. "I should take the flowers home, Floyd." I gestured toward the kitchen, where the 12 roses sat on the counter, navy ribbons still perfect. Floyd's careful wrapping unchanged, despite everything that had happened since I'd bought them. "Dorothy likes roses." Floyd looked at me. Understanding passed between us, without words, what those flowers had meant this afternoon. What they meant now, what they'd become in the hours between purchase and arrest. He accepted them with both hands, 12 stems wrapped in paper that still bore the price tag from this afternoon. The flowers meant for a wife's birthday would ride home in Dorothy Ashford's passenger seat instead, final proof that some betrayals redirect love rather than destroy it. The federal charges came through on Monday morning, 4 counts with language so cold It made 40 years of marriage feel like a footnote in someone else's case file. Detective Garrett called at 8:47 a.m. while I stood in my kitchen drinking coffee that tasted like nothing. She'd transferred the case to the FBI 3 days after the arrests, once the scope became clear. What started as elder financial abuse in one Connecticut dining room had metastasized into wire fraud across state lines, extortion tied to organized gambling networks, conspiracy charges that reached beyond Brent, into structures the federal government had been tracking for 18 months. Brent Townsend faces 4 federal counts. She said, voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd built a case brick by brick and watched it hold. Wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343 Elder Financial Abuse under Connecticut Statute 53A-122 Conspiracy and Extortion related to the gambling network. The FBI wants him, they want Lyle, they want everyone connected to those gambling debts. I set my coffee down. Through the kitchen window, December sun hit the frozen lawn at an angle that made everything look sharp and unforgiving. What about Estelle? I asked. Conspiracy and financial fraud. She's cooperating, but that doesn't erase 18 months of active participation. The prosecutor thinks she'll plead out a void trial, but she's looking at probation minimum, possibly supervised release. 40 years, reduced to conspiracy charges and plea negotiations. The gambling network, Detective Garrett continued, is bigger than we thought. Lyle Prescott wasn't just Brent's lawyer, he was the network's legal fixer. Helped structure debt collections through shell companies, made extortion look like legitimate business transactions. The FBI has been building a RICO case for over a year. Your son-in-law just gave them the entry point they needed. So Brent's betrayal, my personal disaster, my family's implosion, was actually the loose thread that unraveled something federal. The $280,000 he owed wasn't personal gambling debt. It was leverage in a criminal enterprise that spanned 3 states and involved enough money to justify FBI jurisdiction. Lyle's law license, I asked, temporarily revoked. Connecticut State Bar initiated formal disbarment proceedings last Friday. He'll never practice law again, even if he avoids prison. I thought about Lyle sitting at Vivica's table, dead eyes watching me all evening, hand moving towards something beneath the table, before I'd warned him about the officers waiting outside. Professional criminal dressed as dinner guest. There's one more thing, Detective Garrett said. The Ohio case from 2016, the fraud case Brent walked away from. The victim there, a woman named Patricia Holbrook, is joining a civil suit. She wants restitution for the $180,000 he stole from her mother's estate. Of course she did, because Brent hadn't just betrayed me. He'd made a career of betraying people, and I was simply the most recent target. Martin Caldwell called 2 hours later. I was still in the kitchen, still holding coffee I hadn't finished, staring at paperwork that had started piling up the moment the arrests went public. The attorney who'd helped me establish the irrevocable trust now handled the aftermath of using it. They're asking if you'll testify, Martin said without preamble. Federal trial probably next fall. Prosecution wants you to walk the jury through the timeline, the surveillance, the fake affair, texts, the fraudulent documents, everything. I looked at the stack of papers on my kitchen table. Legal documents, financial statements, copies of the trust copies of Floyd's Navy notebook, with 7 months of evidence compiled in careful handwriting. They looked like gravestones marking everything Brent had tried to steal and everything I'd lost while protecting it. Yes, I said. I want to look him in the eye in court. Martin paused. Harlan, you know what that means. Cross-examination. Defense attorneys will... I know what it means. I'll testify. 2 weeks after the party on a Saturday morning that smelled like snow that hadn't fallen yet, someone knocked on my front door at 9:15 a.m. Vivica stood on my porch with Ren beside her small backpack, hanging off one shoulder, decorated with the same unicorns as her pajamas. My daughter looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from dismantling a marriage while explaining to a 7-year-old why Daddy wasn't coming home, but she was there. First visit in 2 years, that didn't involve Brent orchestrating the timing. Grandpa has pancakes, Ren asked, peering around me into the house like she was checking for evidence. Grandpa always has pancakes, I said. They came inside, no agenda, no manufactured visit with time limits and careful topics. Just Vivica setting her purse on the counter, while Ren climbed onto the kitchen chair she'd claimed as hers, back when she was 2, before Brent had convinced Vivica that Sunday visits were too much, that I was getting older and needed rest. that maybe every other week would be better, then once a month, then only holidays, then practically never. I mixed batter while Wren pulled crayons from her backpack and started drawing on the paper. I'd set out the blank side of old mail because that's what grandfathers did, saved paper for grandchildren to draw on. The sound of her crayon scratching across the page was the first sound of childhood that Kitchen had held in 26 months. Vivica stood beside the counter watching me flip pancakes on the griddle butter, sizzling batter bubbling with the exact timing I'd learned when she was Wren's age. "Dad," she said quietly, "I'm sorry I didn't believe you sooner. I didn't turn around. Just watch the pancakes' brown spatula ready. You believed me when it counted." The pancakes smelled like Saturday mornings from decades past, like normal, like the kitchen had woken up, after years of holding its breath. I stacked 3 on a plate, small ones, Wren-sized, and set them in front of my granddaughter. Vivica reached for the syrup without asking where it was, muscle memory from 30 years of this exact routine. She poured it the way she had at age 9, spiraling from outside to center precise and careful, covering every inch. 2 years of manufactured silence erased by breakfast and the simple act of being there. The lawyer slid the transfer documents across the conference table 1 month after my birthday party became a crime scene, and my daughter's hand reached for the pen without anyone trying to stop her this time. We sat in Keith Stratton's downtown Hartford office 14th floor corner view, overlooking the river that looked gray and cold in mid-January light. The same attorney who'd handled my estate planning and the CEO transfer years earlier now oversaw the legitimate transfer I'd actually wanted all along. Coffee sat untouched in both our cups, gone cold, while Keith walked us through the paperwork that separated Mercer Climate Solutions from the charitable trust and placed it exactly where it belonged. The foundation document, Keith explained, tapping a highlighted section with his pen, included provisions for transferring the business interests to direct family under specific conditions. Your father established the trust to protect the assets, but the succession plan was always embedded within it. Vivica looked up from the documents, eyes finding mine across the polished mahogany. "You planned this too." "I established the foundation to protect everything," I said. "But I've always wanted the company in your hands. You have your mother's head for numbers and enough of my stubbornness to run a business that serves people instead of just extracting profit from them." She'd spent 15 years as an elementary school teacher before Brent convinced her to stay home after Wren was born, claiming they didn't need the income, that motherhood was a full-time calling, that her career could wait. 7 years later, she was filing for divorce and discovering she'd been home because Brent needed her. Isolated, needed her, dependent, needed her, easier to manipulate when the time came to help him steal from her father. "The HVAC company you built," she said quietly. "Mercer Climate Solutions. I used to watch you fix furnaces when I was Wren's age and think it was magic making cold houses warm." "It's not magic," I said. "It's understanding systems, something you've always been better at than me." Keith pushed the signature page forward. "Ms. Townsend, if you'll sign here, and initial here, the transfer is complete." Vivica picked up the pen, nice one weighted the kind lawyers keep for documents that matter, and signed 3 times without hesitation. Her signature looked like her mother's careful loops, firm downstrokes, the muscle memory of someone who'd graded thousands of algebra tests with that same pen control. Congratulations," Keith said, collecting the pages. "Mercer Climate Solutions is officially yours." I looked out the window at Hartford's skyline, at the buildings I'd watched rise during 43 years of running a business that started with 1 truck and a reputation for showing up when I said I would. 5 years ago, I'd handed the keys to the wrong person because I'd trusted a son-in-law's MBA over my daughter's judgment. Today I was watching her take ownership of something she should have inherited the day I retired, instead of waiting for betrayal to clear the path. The company would survive me now. It would continue in hands that understood what it meant to serve people instead of exploit them. That was enough. 1 week after the party, when the arrests were still raw, and my marriage was still ending, and I was still figuring out how to be a 68-year-old man whose entire understanding of family had imploded, I walked back into Ashford Flowers on a Friday afternoon that smelled like snow. The bell above the door rang with the same bright chime it had a week earlier, announcing my arrival to the same space where I'd hidden in the storage room and heard my son-in-law plan my destruction. The same bell that had rung when Brent left the shop, when Floyd found me standing among the buckets with my world collapsing. Sound unchanged, meaning transformed completely. Floyd stood behind the counter, but his shoulders weren't rigid this time. No tension, no fear, just my oldest friend arranging carnations in a display that would sit in the front window until someone bought them for occasions that didn't involve conspiracy. "What are you buying today?" he asked. "Yellow roses," I said. "A bouquet." "For whom?" "For Vivica." Floyd nodded and moved toward the cooler where roses waited in metal buckets organized by color. Yellow for friendship, for new beginnings, for relationships being rebuilt after years of manufactured distance. Not red. Red was for romance, for marriages, for relationships that still carried heat instead of ash. Dorothy emerged from the back room, carrying a vase, clear glass, simple holding a dozen red roses in full bloom. The 12 stems I'd given Floyd the night of the arrests had opened perfectly, petals deep crimson against the white wall behind the counter. "They're beautiful, Harlan," she said, setting the vase down with the careful pride of someone displaying treasure. "Floyd has never bought me flowers before. Owns a flower shop for 30 years and never once brought them home." Floyd had the grace to look embarrassed. "Seemed redundant," he muttered, "like a baker bringing home bread." "It's not redundant," Dorothy said firmly, touching one petal with fingers that had worn Floyd's ring for 28 years. "It's thoughtful." Floyd wrapped the yellow roses in brown paper, different than the navy ribbon he'd used for Estelle's red ones. Because these flowers meant something different, were traveling towards something beginning instead of something ending. He tied the bundle with twine hands moving through the familiar motions, while words worked their way forward. "At the day you listened to that recording," he said quietly, not looking up from the wrapping, "and then still bought flowers and walked out that door like nothing had changed, I've never admired anyone so much in my life." "I bought them," I said, "because that's why I came here originally." The red roses bloomed on the counter like proof that betrayal doesn't destroy love's capacity, just redirects its destination. Love meant for 40 years of marriage now growing in a florist's vase tended by a wife who deserved them more than the woman I'd given 40 years to. I walked out of Ashford Flowers carrying yellow roses for my daughter, while red ones bloomed behind me for Dorothy, same flowers, different colors, life, continuing in forms I'd never planned but somehow needed. The bell rang behind me one final time, bright and unchanged, marking an exit that felt less like ending than transformation. The coffee tasted the same as it had for 40 years, but the silence across the kitchen table was a different species entirely, the kind that comes from no one ever sitting there again. I sat in my usual chair, the one that faced the window overlooking the backyard, where the apple tree I'd planted the year Vivica graduated college stood bare-branched against January's sky. The coffee was hot bitter. The way I'd always made it strong enough to taste through the cream, I still added out of habit, even though no one was around to comment on my cholesterol anymore. The house was quiet, not the comfortable quiet of Sunday mornings, when Estelle used to sleep late and I'd sit here reading the paper. This was emptiness, the kind that doesn't pretend to be temporary. For 40 years, someone had sat across from me at this table, eating breakfast, sorting mail, planning the day's errands, existing in the shared space that marriage creates between two people, even when they're not speaking. Now the chair stayed empty, would stay empty. I didn't pretend otherwise. 6 weeks since the birthday party. 4 weeks since Estelle moved out to her sister's place in New Haven, while her lawyer negotiated the divorce settlement that couldn't touch assets I no longer owned. The house felt larger without her, like rooms had expanded in her absence, walls pushing outward to fill the space her 40 years of presence had occupied. I looked out at the apple tree, needed pruning, branches grown wild over 2 winters of neglect, crossing each other at angles that would choke out new growth come spring. The kind of maintenance you do in late winter before the sap starts running, before the tree wakes up and starts the work of bearing fruit. It doesn't know it's capable of yet. The house was still here. I was still here. That was something. My phone vibrated against the kitchen table, buzz that meant text message, not call. I picked it up expecting spam, found instead a photo from Vivica Wren sitting at her own kitchen table, face smeared with syrup fork, held triumphant over a stack of pancakes that looked exactly like the ones I'd made her 2 Saturdays ago. The caption read, "She says hi, Grandpa." I smiled at the screen, typed back, "Tell her hi back, and Saturday I'll make pancakes again." 3 dots appeared immediately. "She'll be there, 7 a.m. sharp." "I'll be ready," I sent. The exchange took 30 seconds, filled the kitchen with something that wasn't quite sound but wasn't quite silence either. The presence of people who existed even when they weren't in the room, who would text photos of syrup-smeared faces and show up Saturday mornings expecting pancakes, because that's what family did when it wasn't performing for cameras or hiding conspiracy. I set the phone down and looked back at the apple tree. I'd need the long-handled pruning shears, from the garage, the ones with the telescoping poles that let you reach high branches without a ladder. Maybe Floyd would come help. He'd always been better at seeing which branches to cut, which ones to leave. 54 years of friendship bought you weekend mornings with pruning shears and someone who knew when to talk and when to just work alongside you in comfortable silence. The tree had been there long enough to witness most of my marriage. Planted when Vivica was young enough to still call me daddy instead of dad, when Estelle and I still finished each other's sentences instead of avoiding them. It had bloomed every spring, regardless of what happened inside. The house dropped apples every fall that I'd gather and make into cider that tasted like October. It would keep blooming, keep dropping apples. Trees didn't care about divorce. The mail came at 10:47, according to the kitchen clock, later than usual, probably because of the ice storm 2 days ago that had left everything running behind schedule. I heard the mailbox clang shut from inside the house, waited 5 minutes for the mail truck to turn the corner, then walked out in slippers and bathrobe to collect whatever bills and catalogs constituted my daily correspondence. 3 envelopes, 2 junk, 1 handwritten in blue ink with careful loops I'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards and the marriage certificate we'd signed in 1984. I took it inside, set it on the table, looked at it for 30 seconds before opening. The letter was a 1.5-page blue ink matching the envelope handwriting that belonged to someone who'd spent 15 years teaching 5th grade before Brent convinced Vivica to quit. Neat, precise, teacher's handwriting, wife's handwriting, stranger's handwriting. She didn't start with apology. Started with memory, instead meeting in 1982 at a mutual friend's barbecue wedding, 2 years later, in a Hartford courthouse with discount flowers and borrowed clothes. Vivica's birth in 1985, when we were still young enough to think exhaustion was temporary. Small details rendered in the careful language of someone cataloging what's already gone. I don't know how many things I've let slip through my fingers without realizing it, she wrote midway through the second page. Not just you, not just us, but the person I was before I decided that wanting more was the same as deserving it. The final paragraph sat alone at the bottom, separated from the rest by white space that felt intentional. The roses you bought that day at Floyd's shop, the ones I said were tacky when you called to tell me you'd be late. I really liked them. I've always liked red roses. I'm sorry for saying otherwise. I'm sorry for a lot of things. But mostly I'm sorry that by the time I figured out what mattered, you'd already decided I didn't. No signature, just the letter ending mid-thought like she'd run out of words or run out of right to use them. I folded the paper along its original creases, sat very still for a time I didn't measure. Then I stood, walked to the drawer, where I kept old tax returns and instruction manuals for appliances I'd probably never fix, and filed the letter between the 2019 property assessment and the warranty for a dishwasher we'd bought in 2021. Didn't throw it away, didn't reread it, just filed it with the other documents that recorded facts without requiring response. I pulled on my winter coat, the heavy navy one I'd bought myself 6 years ago. Not the expensive black one Estelle gave me 3 Christmases back. Grabbed the pruning shears from the garage. The apple tree was waiting. And Saturday morning, a 7-year-old would expect pancakes, and what needed to be done was simply the next thing in front of me. The red light caught me Friday afternoon directly in front of Ashford Flowers, and through the window, I could see Floyd putting up a small, hand-lettered sign, "Fresh roses $12. Same price as 6 weeks ago when I'd walked in needing flowers for a wife's birthday, and walked out with evidence that would end my marriage and save everything else. Same careful lettering Floyd used for all his window signs, black marker on white cardstock, simple and clear. Same shop, same flowers, same Friday afternoon rhythm of a small business, preparing for weekend customers, who'd buy roses for anniversaries and apologies and occasions that didn't involve conspiracy. I sat at the red light with my engine idling, coffee going cold in the cup holder beside me, watching Floyd secure the sign in the corner of the display window with the same precision he'd used to document 7 months of surveillance. Dorothy appeared beside him, silver hair catching afternoon light hands, moving to adjust a vase of yellow tulips that sat too far left for her sense of symmetry. Floyd said something I couldn't hear through the glass. She laughed. He smiled. They looked like what they were, two people who'd spent 28 years building a life together, one flower arrangement at a time, ordinary and unremarkable, and exactly what marriage was supposed to be when it wasn't performance. The sign hung in the window like an answer to a question I hadn't known I was asking 6 weeks ago. Fresh roses, $12. The price that bought birthday flowers and accidentally purchased salvation. The transaction that should have been forgettable, $12, on a December afternoon impulse buy, thoughtless gesture, but instead became the hinge point between everything before and everything after. I remembered standing in that shop with roses in my hand, phone ringing with Estelle's call, asking where I was, her voice carrying the exact tone of annoyance I'd spent 40 years learning to navigate. Remembered telling her I'd bought roses. Remembered her response. Red roses, Harlan, those are so tacky. And the way something small had shifted in my chest. Not broken, just noticed. Floyd stepped back from the window, examined the sign's placement, with the focus of someone who understood that details mattered. Dorothy touched his shoulder in passing casual gesture, the kind married people make without thinking, because touch is language after enough years. They looked content. They looked like they belonged in that window frame, on that Friday afternoon lives, continuing in the shape they had chosen, instead of the shape someone else had tried to force them into. The light was still red. Traffic waited. The world kept turning at red light speeds, slower than urgency, faster than stillness. I thought about the price of things. $12 for roses that exposed a conspiracy. $2.4 million someone tried to steal. 40 years of marriage that ended in a kitchen with one word, don't. 2 years of manufactured distance from my daughter. 7 months of surveillance condensed into a Navy notebook. One birthday party that became a crime scene. 68 years of building a life that someone decided was easier to steal than earn. The light turned green-red to yellow, to green traffic signal, giving permission to stop looking backward and start driving forward. I pressed the accelerator, didn't pull into Floyd's parking lot, didn't stop for flowers I didn't need. Just drove past the shop where everything had changed because I'd made the smallest decision, buy roses even when they weren't wanted, because that's what you did on your wife's birthday, even when the marriage had stopped feeling like the thing you'd signed up for 40 years ago. In my rearview mirror, Floyd and Dorothy moved away from the window, returning to work that would continue whether I stopped or drove past, whether anyone bought roses today or waited until tomorrow. The sign stayed visible for 3 more seconds before the turn took it out of sight. Fresh roses, $12. Same price it had been. Same price it would be next Friday when someone else walked in needing flowers, and maybe if they paid attention, if they listened, if the universe was feeling particularly ironic, got salvation thrown in for free. I smiled. Not the performance smile I'd worn through Thanksgiving dinners and birthday parties while Brent calculated how to rob me. Real smile. The kind that comes from surviving something you didn't think you'd survive, and discovering that the pieces left over were actually the pieces that mattered. They tried to take so much. 40 years of trust that I'd built with handshake deals and showing up when I said I would. 2 years with my daughter that Brent had stolen through manufactured distance and fake affair evidence. The ordinary mornings that seemed unremarkable, coffee at the kitchen table, mail sorted into piles, weekends pruning apple trees, but turned out to be everything when you measured them against their absence. But the house was still mine. Protected by a trust I'd established 6 months before the birthday party became a crime scene, before the arrests, before the moment I pressed play and watched 40 years of marriage end in real time. The company was still my family's, transferred to Vivica's hands where it belonged, where it should have gone 5 years ago, if I'd trusted my daughter's judgment over my son-in-law's MBA. And my daughter, after 2 years of manufactured silence, after 26 months of being told I was too old, too tired, too much trouble for regular visits, my daughter knew who her real father was. Not the man who'd married her for access to assets. The man who'd blown out 68 birthday candles and wished for exactly what he had. Her standing beside him, hand on his shoulder, choosing him when it counted. What's the price of everything that matters? Turns out exactly $12 if you're paying attention. I drove through the intersection, past the flower shop toward home, where an apple tree waited for pruning, and Saturday morning, a 7-year-old expected pancakes. And Monday, I'd probably get called about testimony dates for a federal trial I'd promised to attend. Life continuing. Not the life I'd planned, not the marriage I'd expected to carry into retirement, But life nonetheless transformed and smaller and somehow larger than everything I'd almost lost. All it cost me to stop them to protect the house and the company and the relationship with my daughter and the ordinary mornings that were everything was $12 worth of roses I'd bought on a December afternoon, because that's what husbands did on wives' birthdays. $12. Best money I ever spent. And to you listening to my story, remember this betrayal doesn't always announce itself with warning signs. I trusted too easily. For 40 years, I believed loyalty and love were the same, that marriage meant partnership instead of performance. I handed my business to a man I barely knew because he said the right things at family dinners. Don't make my mistake. Trust isn't given freely just because someone married into your family. Trust is earned through actions that match words. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any other kind because it comes from people who are supposed to protect you. When your own wife and son-in-law conspire against you, when family betrayal becomes your reality instead of something you hear about in stories, you learn that blood and marriage don't guarantee loyalty. But here's what I also learned. I walked into that flower shop at exactly the right moment. $12 worth of roses saved everything because life put me there when I needed to hear the truth, painful as it was. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment below. Tell me what you would have done differently, or share your own experience with family betrayal if you're comfortable. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, please share it with them. Subscribe to Revenge Dad for more stories about standing up when the people closest to you try to tear you down. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means more than you know. As a final reminder, this story contains fictionalized elements for storytelling purposes, but the lessons about vigilance, evidence, and protecting what you've built, those are real and worth remembering.